Okay, everyone, welcome back. We're talking about Mulan at a point in her story where she needs to choose between being true to herself and ultimately being part of society. The crisis in the film that is portrayed here is that she is an only daughter, she's an only child, she has no siblings. This is different. Actually, in the conventional 木兰诗，其实木兰是应该有姐姐跟弟弟，对不对？在木兰诗里面，and so 当她回来的时候呢，就是姐姐啊，然后弟弟这样。But in the film, she's an only daughter. I think that's a little bit different. Because if you have a younger brother, normally it's the younger brother who should go, right? But in the conventional old poem, Mulan chooses because she doesn't have an older brother, and her father has to go. In the film, she takes the place of her father. And why does she do this? Why does she do this? In the film, we're not actually very sure. It's a strange moment. In the original Mulan Shi, it's very clear that the reason Mulan goes to fight for her father 是因为孝道. There's no other reason. There's nothing in the original poem to tell us that Mulan is struggling with her identity. Right? In the original old poem, there is nothing in the original text that says, Mulan 没有办法符合社会的期待，所以哪天就看到了这个军帖，卷卷有爷命，就决定代父从军。No, in the original poem 是因为他孝道、高道、正确道，就算我是女儿身，我都可以代父从军。这是一种女儿对于父亲的孝道的最高的表现。In the original poem. But in the film, there's a suggestion that she's comfortable doing this, that this is part of her identity. Of course, it's also about wanting to help her father, but it's about her trying to bring honor to her family. There is a sense of honor here that is, I think, different from the original poem. Whether that is okay, whether that is appropriate, I think we can talk about it. But this is an interesting change. And so she goes to this camp, right? And she meets the famous Li Xiang, right? The very nice-looking man, son of a general, right? Captain Li. Right? And there's this, I think, very nice song, "I'll Make a Man Out of You." And I think it's very nice because the Chinese version is sang by Chen Long. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that he's the right person to portray this character in the Chinese version. But the lyrics betray something a little bit sexist. It sort of implies that being a man is what Chinese society wants. And this is a common theme. It's portrayed this way, that you need to be a man. Right? We hear this in the mockery of Chinese culture. We hear this in Chinese jokes told by Americans, right? Be a man. And that's a little bit of a problem. Although I think there is also some fact to it, there's some truth to it. It sort of emphasizes how much Chinese society is sexist. 我们是多么的重男轻女。I'll make a man out of you. Something to remember. So when Mulan goes through her training, right, at the beginning, she's terrible at it. Right, but there is this pole, right, this wooden pole with an arrow that she needs to retrieve with the two heavy metals, right? And I think that in this sense, Mulan is trying to prove something about herself. I have a comment from Bonnie. Bonnie, you are absolutely right. Mulan is not at all the conventional princess. She wants to be like a boy, and she wants to prove that she can be just like a boy. But what are her motivations? Why does she want to do this? It's a little complicated. She wants to help her father, bring honor to her family, but also she wants to be true to herself. But the point that I was trying to make was that in the original poem, Mulan doesn't seem to want to prove anything. So what happens after 壮士十年归, right? 着我旧时少, right? And she just goes back to her life. She becomes a woman again. She's not a hero in the original text, in the original source. But here she is. She has something to prove. And so there is a part in I'll make a man out of you, like, pack up, go home, right? You're through. How could I ever make a man out of you? Right? Then there's a moment where Mulan, she can go home, right? She's been let go. But no, she chooses to prove herself. And so it's very different. I think there's more of a self-determination in the film of Mulan, in the way Mulan's portrayed here in the film. There's a lot more self-determination. Like, I can do this. She's proving something to herself and to society. Okay, not because it's not all about her father. That's the point I'm trying to make. And then, what do men do, right? Once they're training and their training is finished and they're all very good. There's a song called "A Girl Worth Fighting For," which is also sexist, right? There's also a sex. This is also it's meant to be, I think, kind of funny, where these three male characters, sort of sidekicks, right? Mulan's friends. They sing this, what I really want from a girl, right? And of course they want her to be beautiful, right? They want her to cook very well, they want her to always treat him nicely, admire him, a girl that admires men. This is what they want. And then Mulan says, how about a girl who's got a brain, who always speaks her mind? And the boys go, nah, not good. Right? I have to ask this of myself, actually. What are my expectations for a girl worth fighting for? And this is not resolved. This is ultimately not resolved. The sexism seems to be allowed in this society, and it's okay. And I think there's a little bit of a problem here. When the boys are allowed to do this and have these comments that are a little lewd, a little inappropriate, and wanting to have women, girls, who are obedient and conventional. This doesn't step out of the stereotype strong enough for me. We all know what happens as the film develops. There is a terrible scene where they look into this battlefield, this wasteland of dead soldiers, and Li Xiang is able to find the helmet of his father, the general, who are actually the imperial army, and they've all been defeated. They've all had to die. Why do they all have to die? Because Mulan has to save the country, right? If they were alive, it wouldn't. 轮不到木兰，对不对？整个国家军队全部都要阵亡，所以木兰才能拯救中国。And then, of course, we know Mulan single-handedly saves her friends in the army, and also the emperor. There's a series of unlikely events where she aims a cannon at an avalanche, at a mountain, and causes an avalanche, right? That kills most of the Han army. Incidentally, the villain in Mulan, whose name is Shan Yu, right? He is a Han. He is a Han. Sorry, a Han in English. 匈奴人, a Han. How is he portrayed? What does he look like? I think you will remember that he is portrayed as really big, right, and rough looking, and he's black. His skin color is gray and black, and that's not how Huns look actually. Huns, there's no skin color like this, but he's portrayed, I think, in a similar color to Ursula, the sea witch in Disney's Little Mermaid. Okay, that is racism. I think that's quite racist. When you portray a character that's ugly, okay, but to have a character that's inappropriately, colored of their skin is not a very good thing. It's something for us to think about, but we sort of let it go, right? Because it's out of our, because they're our enemy. He's an enemy. He's a villain to Mulan, so we think it's okay, but there are some problems here that I think we should think about. Now, ultimately, Mulan is able to defeat Shan Yu by destroying in the process, destroying the emperor's palace, right? And the emperor ultimately bows to her. Is this realistic in any way? I can't get over the fact that it's so romanticized, so unlikely that this is not Chinese culture. Right? Even if this really happened, that Mulan was a war hero, because of this kind of honor and this face, I believe what would happen is, in a real world setting, they would actually get rid of Mulan and find a man to replace her and give her the glory. This is very deep, dark society. But the point I want to make is that in the film, this young girl, this young teenage girl, who is portrayed as actually in many ways very Western, right? She's very Western. She's individualized. She's free-minded. She's free-thinking. She's liberal. Doing an act against society, ultimately she gets this big reward. Do you all think that's okay? That's a good idea? Do you think that's okay? To be true to your heart? This is the ending song. True to your heart, where they rock and roll, right? The Hua family and their ancestors, they rock and roll. Mushu. I think, I used to think when I was, a few years ago, when I first taught the Disney princess tradition, I was very against this. I think that the portrayal of Chinese society, it should be more real, I think. And the reason for this is because Disney has so much influence, and they watch, kids everywhere, they watch these films. And what if they have this idea of Chinese culture that is simplified in this way? Is that okay? I'm not sure. But nowadays, I think I've become a little older now, and I think that if it were my children growing up and they believed that they could do this, right? If they believe that they can, go against society in some way because of the goodness of their heart and their abilities, and they can save a country, that's not a bad message. That's a pretty good message too. So I don't know, students, you can think about it. But for me, I've changed my position. Now I think as long as we are more aware of these problems, the message is ultimately a good one. The message is ultimately positive for young children, and that's not too bad. There's something I want to mention here. This character, Mushu, he is voiced by a black comedian, Eddie Murphy, and he is portrayed as this kind of character who is similar to the genie in Aladdin. So a character that's completely out of the culture, Right? Mushu does not act or think or talk like anything in Chinese culture. He's portrayed as a black man, actually, fast talking. Even the expressions, I think, remind me of Eddie Murphy. This kind of more exaggerated body language and language. And critics have criticized this. They say that having a dragon who is diminished, right, a small dragon, that's creative, but that's kind of insulting to Chinese culture, right? Because dragons are important, and you portray him as not having a lot of powers, right? You portray him as not having magic. There is magic in the film, like there is in other Disney princess films, but they diminish the power of the supernatural to a character like this, a caricature. And therefore, maybe this is not so respectful to either Chinese culture or to African American culture. So it's a white perspective, basically. It's a white, more racist perspective. However, I shift my position. I think I agree, but also it's a very nice character, and he's a good character to have. But we should be aware of this, that he is like the conventional black sidekick. I would recommend, if all of you want to think more about how female characters are portrayed, I would, first of all, encourage you to watch the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and to come to our workshop where we will talk in detail about these two films in comparison. Think about how the women are portrayed. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is also a very successful film. Right? It's a foreign language film by real people, right? 武侠片, Chinese, Asian cast, right? Speaking Chinese. But it's very, very successful. And how are these characters portrayed? There are 3 female characters in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon that are important. So, of course, the central figure is Yu Jiaolong, right? Xiaolong. She's the source of all the problems. She steals the sword. And of course, there is Yu Shoulian, played by Michelle Yang Ziqiong, and 闭眼狐狸, Zheng Pei Pei, I think, 演的闭眼狐狸. So I'll use a little Chinese here, so we can end our discussion of Mulan, and we'll switch to Frozen. 卧虎藏龙里面的女性有非常不一样的呈现。木兰very westernized, right? 非常的西化的一个女生。章子怡演的这个玉娇龙 ，she's also very rebellious. Right? She also wants something more. She also doesn't want to conform and get married into her society, although she comes from a very prosperous family. She wants some kind of adventure. She wants to be different. 游走在江湖上。But she has to know that 就算在江湖上，还是有道义，不是你可以为所欲为。杨紫琼演的这个于秀莲，展现出的是，就算你是江湖上，的女人，你仍然要被社会束缚。Okay? And of course, Yu Jiaolong, she learns this at the end. Right? In the end, there's a very famous scene where she throws herself off of a cliff. That's the ending of the film. And it's a very touching moment because she is, in some ways, she is atoning for her sins, for what she has done. She has to pay the price for what she does. 就算是她的师父，这个闭眼狐狸，他闭眼狐狸的这个角色呢，是跟李慕白的师父。就是对，然后有一句话，那个闭眼狐狸说了一句话，在这个电影快结束的时候说，入了防伪，还不给我真传，类似这样的意思。 So women are excluded from this male patriarchy, even if they are the closest of people. And there are social boundaries between these three. And so it shows a more realistic, I think a more complicated positioning and a more fully fleshed out characterization of Asian women, particularly Chinese women. There are also other films to recommend when it comes to how women are portrayed. Ang Lee does it very well. 饮食男女 is also a very good film to watch if you want to think about how Asians are portrayed in cinema. I will end with a more disturbing note so that all of you can think about this. In Western media, actually, there are two tendencies. Either a female, an Asian female, is portrayed as being really sexy, extremely sexy. If you've watched films like Kill Bill, it's like this. And sexualized and exotic and mysterious. There's this stereotype. Either that or they whitewash. So they have a white person portray a female character. There are problems with both, in both ways. And something for us to think about in our society. We are students of English, right? We are students who are learning Western culture and Western language. We need to think about how we are portrayed in Western media, in Western society. We need to think about how our group gets represented and how we can help shape this kind of representation. Okay, so that is a very deep, I think, a very heavy turn to take. But we'll switch to Frozen, the story of two sisters, when we get back for our final session. Thank you very much.